My name is Cassandra Elaine Whitmore and I am 36 years old. 6 months ago I sat in a lawyer's office in a city I had not called home in nearly a decade, and I watched my parents sign away everything my grandmother had ever built. The house, the business, the trust fund she had spent 40 years quietly growing. All of it went to my sister Renata in a single afternoon while I sat at the far end of a polished mahogany table with nothing in front of me. Not a folder, not a glass of water, not even a chair with a cushion that matched the others. When the lawyer finished reading the documents, my mother looked at me with the kind of calm that only comes from a decision made long ago, and she said, "You have always been the difficult one, Cassie. You have always made everything harder than it needs to be." My sister said nothing. She was looking at the documents in front of her the way people look at things they already knew were coming. I stood up. I looked at Renata for a long moment. I picked up my bag. And I walked out of that room without saying a single word. 6 months later, my phone lit up on a Tuesday morning with 51 missed calls. Before I tell you how we got to that moment, let me take you back to where it all started, because this story did not begin in that lawyer's office. It began a long time before that in a house in Crestwood Falls, Ohio, where I grew up, being the second daughter of Robert and Patricia Whitmore, and where I learned very early that in my family second did not mean equal. It meant invisible. Please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to Whispers of Wisdom if you have not already. And I would love to know where in the world you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Drop it in the comments below. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Growing up in Crestwood Falls, I understood from a very young age that my sister Renata was the sun in our family and I was something that existed in her orbit. Renata was 4 years older than me, and everything about her seemed designed to make the people around her feel warm and chosen. She had our mother's laugh and our father's patience, and from the time she was old enough to help in the kitchen, she was the daughter my parents pointed to when they wanted to show the world what they had built. I do not say this with bitterness. I say it because it is simply what was true, and because the truth of it shaped everything that came after. When Renata graduated high school, our parents rented out the back room of Murphy's Grill on Elm Street and invited every person they had ever met. There were flower arrangements and a custom cake and a slideshow my father had put together himself. 4 years later, when I graduated with honors in accounting, my mother called the same Murphy's Grill and made a reservation for a table of 4. We had the soup and sandwiches. My father paid the check and said, "Well done, kid." That was the extent of it. I do not tell you this to seem pathetic. I tell you this because I need you to understand the pattern. The pattern that was already woven into the fabric of my family long before any lawyers or trust funds or FBI raids entered the picture. The pattern was simply this. Renata mattered in ways that were visible and celebrated. I mattered in ways that were acknowledged when convenient and forgotten when they were not. When I got into Ohio State for accounting, my parents told me they could not help with tuition. "Your father and I have the shop to think about," my mother said. She meant Whitmore Home Renovations, the small contracting business my father had started in the 90s that had grown into something respectable over 2 decades of hard work. "We need everything we have to keep the business going." Renata had already started working alongside my father by then. She answered phones and managed scheduling and learned how to read contracts. She was becoming the next generation of Whitmore Home Renovations. I was becoming the one who left. I did not leave because I did not love my family. I left because I had something in me that needed more than Crestwood Falls could offer, and I had the grades and the drive to go get it. I took out student loans. I worked 2 jobs through most of college. I graduated with a 3.9 grade point average and a license to practice as a certified public accountant. My parents did not come to my graduation. "The business cannot run itself," my mother told me over the phone. "You understand." I said I did, and I moved to Columbus and I started building a life out of absolutely nothing. For 7 years I built. I got a position at a mid-level accounting firm and worked my way up until I had my own client list and my own corner office and my own reputation as someone who was thorough and reliable and impossible to rattle. I paid off my student loans dollar by dollar. I called home every Sunday. I sent birthday cards. I flew home for Christmas when I could afford the ticket, and sometimes when I could not really afford it but went anyway because I believed in trying. And every Sunday phone call went the same way. My mother would answer, and before I had finished saying hello, she would say, "How is everything at the shop going?" and I would wait for her to ask about me, and eventually she would, but it always felt like an afterthought. Like she had remembered at the last moment that she had a second daughter somewhere in Columbus who was doing things she did not fully understand. "I am fine, Mom." "Good. You know your sister has been handling everything for your father. She is really doing a tremendous job." "Good for her, Mom. Are you coming home for Thanksgiving?" "If I can." The message was never spoken directly. It never needed to be. The message was that Renata had chosen the right thing and I had chosen something else, and choosing something else meant I would always be slightly outside the circle of what mattered most to my family. 3 years before the lawyer's office visit, everything changed in a way I did not see coming. My grandmother Dorothy Whitmore had been sick for most of that year. She was 81 years old and had lived alone in a small house in Mayfield Heights since my grandfather passed, and she had the kind of quiet dignity that comes from a life lived carefully and without complaint. I visited her twice that year, and both times she held my hand and said things that I kept in my heart long after she was gone. She died on a Thursday in October and I flew home for the funeral. I was still raw with grief when her attorney, a woman named Sandra Kellerman, called a small family meeting at the house the week after the service. Sandra Kellerman was not my parents' lawyer. She was my grandmother's lawyer, and she had been handling my grandmother's affairs for over 20 years. She sat in my grandmother's living room with a leather folder and explained that my grandmother had set up a trust fund several years prior. The total value was $600,000. Per my grandmother's instructions, it was to be divided equally between her 2 granddaughters. $300,000 to Renata. $300,000 to me. The distribution was to be completed within 90 days of death. My parents told Sandra Kellerman that they would handle the details with their own attorney and that I needed to get back to Columbus for work. Which was true. I did. I trusted them to handle it because they were my parents and because I was grieving and because in that moment I did not have the capacity to question anything. Sandra Kellerman mailed me a courtesy copy of my grandmother's will that I filed away in my email and barely looked at because I assumed things would proceed the way my grandmother had intended. They did not. Months passed. I did not hear from Sandra Kellerman or from my parents or from any bank about any distribution. When I asked my mother about it, she said they were still sorting out some estate paperwork and that these things take time. I accepted this because I was busy and because I was not thinking about money I had not expected to receive. My grandmother had wanted to give me something. I trusted that it would arrive when the paperwork was sorted. It never arrived, and I stopped asking. 2 years after my grandmother's death, my mother called me on a Sunday with more tension in her voice than usual. "We have some tax issues at the business," she said. "Nothing serious, but we need someone to look at the books. Can you come home?" I bought a plane ticket with my own money and flew back to Crestwood Falls on a Friday evening. Saturday morning I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by 3 years of financial records, and within 2 hours I found something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There were cash withdrawals scattered across 18 months totaling somewhere close to $90,000. The documentation for each one was vague at best. Miscellaneous expenses was written repeatedly in my sister's handwriting. No receipts, no invoices, no vendor names, just money leaving the account with a loose explanation that would not survive 5 minutes of scrutiny from an IRS auditor. I found my mother in the garden. "Mom, I need to ask you about some withdrawals I found in the records." Her expression shifted immediately. "What kind of withdrawals?" "Large ones. Unverified. Almost $90,000 across 18 months. If the IRS looks at these, you need documentation." Her face went still. "That is company money, Cassie. We know what it was for." "What was it for?" "Business expenses." "I need specifics, Mom. I need invoices or vendor records or bank transfers. Something the IRS would accept." Renata walked out onto the porch behind us with her arms crossed. "Are you seriously going through our private records? Mom asked you to help with the taxes." "Helping with taxes does not mean interrogating our business decisions," Renata said. I kept my voice level because I was a professional and because I had learned a long time ago that losing my temper with my family was the fastest way to be dismissed. "I am not interrogating anyone. I am telling you that $90,000 of undocumented cash withdrawals is a serious liability. If the IRS audits you and asks where this money went and you cannot show them, you are looking at penalties and possibly more." My mother stood up from her garden chair. "Cassie, you always do this. You always come in and find problems and make everyone feel like criminals." "We are not criminals. I know that, Mom." "Then trust us. We know our own business." Renata looked at me with something I could not quite name. Not guilt exactly. More like irritation. "You have been gone for years," she said. "You do not understand how we run things. I am trying to protect you. We do not need your protection. We need you to file the taxes and go home." I filed the taxes as cleanly as I could given what I had to work with, and I flew back to Columbus the next morning. I did not bring up the withdrawals again. I told myself it was not my problem. I told myself they were adults and they had made their choice. I told myself I had tried and been refused, and that was the end of my responsibility. What I did not know was that this moment would come back around in a way none of us could have predicted. The email arrived on a Monday in February. It came from an attorney named Gerald Pierce. Subject line said family estate planning. Your attendance required. He was asking me to come home the following Friday for a family meeting. He described it as an opportunity to discuss important decisions about family assets. My stomach did something uncomfortable when I read it. I texted Renata, "Do you know what this is about?" 3 hours passed. She did not reply. I called my mother. "Is everything okay? Is someone sick?" "No one is sick," she said. "Just come Friday. Can you tell me anything?" "Friday, Cassie." She hung up. I took a personal day and bought a ticket and spent the flight running through possibilities. Maybe they were setting up retirement accounts. Maybe they were finally thinking about succession for the business. And then a thought that I pushed away quickly because I did not want to get my hopes up. Maybe they were finally ready to talk about my grandmother's money. The money that had been meant for both of us and had never arrived. I should have known better than to hope. Gerald Pierce had his office in a converted Victorian house off Madison Street. I arrived 10 minutes early. The receptionist told me the others were already in the conference room. Already inside. Of course. I walked down a short hallway and through the glass panel in the door I could see my parents and Renata sitting together around an oval table with coffee cups and folders spread out in front of them. They were laughing at something Gerald Pierce had said. No one had waited for me. No one had saved me a seat near them. I opened the door. All 4 of them looked up. "Mom, Dad, hi." My father said, "You made it. Not glad you are here. Not thanks for coming." Just a flat statement of something that was apparently uncertain until proven otherwise. I sat down in the empty chair at the end of the table. My end had nothing on it. No folder, no coffee, no documents. Gerald Pierce shook my hand and went through some professional pleasantries and then opened his folder and began to read. The family home at 314 Birchwood Drive, valued at approximately $900,000, would be transferred to Renata Whitmore. My chest tightened. That was the house where I had grown up. The house where my grandmother had sat at the kitchen table and taught me how to play cards. The house where every Christmas and every Easter and every small ordinary memory of being a child had happened. Renata Whitmore home renovations, including all assets, equipment, contracts and client relationships, would also be transferred to Renata Whitmore. And then the part that landed like a physical blow. The family trust fund, currently valued at $840,000, would be placed entirely under Renata Whitmore's sole management and ownership. I sat very still. I heard the lawyer turn a page. "For Cassandra Elaine Whitmore." He paused. "Read the page. No assets have been designated at this time." The room was completely silent except for the sound of the heat running through the vents. I said, "I am sorry." "What does that mean exactly?" My mother spoke before Gerald Pierce could respond. "Cassie, we have thought about this very carefully as a family. This is what makes the most sense given everything." I was not part of that conversation. I heard that in my voice when I said it. "Renata has been here," my father said quietly. He was looking at the table when he said it. "She has been part of the business. She has been present. And I have not." My voice cracked a little on that one. My father said nothing. My mother said, "You chose to leave Cassie. You chose your path. Renata chose family." I thought about the student loans. The graduations they did not come to. The Thanksgiving I worked in extra shifts so I could afford a ticket home. The Sunday phone calls where I was always the afterthought. Renata crossed her arms and said, "You have a good career. You are stable. You do not need this the way I do." I said, "That is not the point. The point is fairness." My mother said, "You have always been the difficult one, Cassie. Always questioning. Always making things complicated." That word, difficult. I had heard it my whole life. Difficult because I asked questions. Difficult because I wanted explanations. Difficult because I refused to accept that my place in this family was somehow smaller than my sister's by default. I thought about my grandmother. About her holding my hand and saying equal shares. I thought about Sandra Kellerman and the trust fund and the 90 days that had come and gone 5 years ago without a single dollar reaching my account. I thought about the cash withdrawals I had found in the business records 2 years ago that nobody wanted to explain. And I thought about the fact that the trust fund sitting in front of my sister right now should have been worth $300,000 less than it was because $300,000 of it was supposed to have been mine 5 years ago. But I said none of this in that room. I stood up. Gerald Pierce looked startled. I looked at Renata for a long moment. She was staring at her coffee cup. "Congratulations, Renata," I said. "I genuinely mean that. Good luck with all of it." She looked up at me and something moved across her face that I could not read completely. I picked up my bag. My mother said, "Cassie, do not be dramatic." "I am not being dramatic, Mom. I am just going home." I walked down the hallway and through the reception area and out into the cold February air, and I sat in my rental car for 20 minutes before I could make my hands stop shaking enough to start the engine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "You are overreacting. Call me when you calm down." I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and drove to the airport. On the plane I opened my email archive and searched for Sandra Kellerman. I found it immediately. The email she had sent 5 years ago after my grandmother's funeral. I clicked the attachment and read through the legal language until I found Section 8 on page 14. The sum of $600,000 held in the Dorothy Mae Whitmore Trust shall be divided equally between granddaughters Cassandra Elaine Whitmore and Renata Lynn Whitmore, each receiving $300,000. Distribution to occur no later than 90 days following the date of death. I read it 3 times on that plane. Then I printed it when I got home. Then I put it in a folder labeled Grandmother's Documents and put the folder in my desk drawer. And then I sat at my kitchen table in the dark for a long time and thought about what it means to be born into a family that does not see you. In the weeks that followed, I watched Renata announce herself to the world. She posted on every platform. Photos of her standing in front of the house on Birchwood Drive holding a glass of sparkling wine with a caption that said "Officially Home." Photos of her at her desk at Whitmore Home Renovations with a caption about carrying on the family legacy. A long post about how grateful she was to have parents who believed in her and trusted her with so much. The comments were full of celebration. My Aunt Linda said, "Your grandmother would have been so proud." My cousin Jamie said, "This is so well deserved." Old family friends and neighbors who had known us both our whole lives were congratulating my sister on receiving everything while I had received nothing, and not one of them seemed to notice the person who was missing from the picture. I did not comment on any of it. I did not react. I did not reach out. But I did screenshot everything. Not because I had a plan. Just because something in me needed a record of what had happened. A record that this was real and not something I was imagining or misremembering. 3 months after the lawyers' meeting, Renata called me. It was a Tuesday morning and I almost did not pick up. Her voice was careful when I answered. She asked how I was. I asked her what she needed. She laughed the way people laugh when they are nervous. She needed to borrow money. The business was dealing with some unexpected equipment costs and her personal funds were tied up in some investments that were not liquid yet, and she was wondering if I could cover $15,000 just temporarily. Just for a few months until things settled. I asked her why the trust fund was not available. She said it was complicated. I said, "Complicated how?" She said, "Investments are not always liquid, Cassie." I said, "Renata, you have $840,000 in a trust fund." She said, "The money is tied up right now." I said, "I do not have $15,000 to lend you." She said, "You are a CPA. You make good money." I said, "I also have rent and living expenses and student loan payments I made alone because our parents did not help me with school the way they helped you with everything else." Her voice changed. "You are being selfish. You have always been selfish. That is exactly what Mom always says." "That is because it is true," she said. And she hung up. I sat at my desk for a while after that and I thought about the phrase, "the money is tied up in investments." And something small and uncomfortable settled in the back of my mind. 4 months after the lawyers' meeting, I received a phone call from a number I did not recognize with a Columbus area code. I answered. The voice on the other end was professional and measured. She introduced herself as Sandra Kellerman. She was calling because her office was conducting a routine audit of trust fund distributions from the Dorothy Whitmore estate. According to her records, I was designated to receive $300,000. She wanted to confirm whether I had received those funds. I sat up very straight. "No," I said. "I never received anything." Silence on the other end. Not even a phone call or a letter. My parents told me the money had gone toward family expenses. More silence. Then Sandra said, "Miss Whitmore, the funds in that trust were designated specifically and individually for you and your sister. They were not family funds. They were not available for general household or business use. Your grandmother was extremely clear about her intentions. Do you have a copy of the will?" I said I did. She asked me to email it to her immediately and I did. Sandra Kellerman called me back 2 days later. "Miss Whitmore, I have now reviewed everything. The full trust distribution of $600,000 was transferred to your father's account as administrator with explicit written instructions to distribute equal portions within 90 days. That was 5 years ago. The distribution to you never occurred." "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked. "It means your $300,000 was not given to you as it was legally required to be. And there may be additional complications regarding what happened to those funds afterward." "What kind of complications?" "I need to investigate further before I say more. But I want to be very clear. You have done nothing wrong. You are the injured party here. May I contact your family and their attorney on your behalf? Yes. Please do not discuss this with your family until I advise you to. If there are legal matters developing, I need to ensure no evidence is moved or altered. Understood. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for a very long time. I thought about Renata saying the money is tied up in investments. I thought about the $90,000 of undocumented cash withdrawals I had found in the business records 2 years ago. I thought about the trust fund that was supposed to be worth $600,000 but had somehow become $840,000 by the time Gerald Pierce read its value in that conference room. I thought about the math not adding up. And I thought about the fact that somewhere in that not adding up was something that went far beyond family favoritism. The truth was already in motion. I had not started it. I had not pushed it. It was coming on its own. 6 months after the lawyers' meeting, it arrived. I was in a client meeting on a Tuesday morning when my phone started buzzing on the table beside me. I turned it face down. It kept going. I excused myself at the break and picked it up, and the screen was full of notifications. 51 missed calls. Texts from my mother and father and Renata stacked on top of each other like something breaking apart in real time. The most recent text from Renata said, "They are here. The FBI is here. Call me now." I stepped into an empty conference room and called my mother back. She answered immediately, and she was not speaking, she was sobbing. The kind of sobbing that takes over the whole body. "Mom, what is happening?" "They came to the house," she managed. "They had a warrant. They took computers and filing cabinets and boxes of documents. They are at the business too." "Cassie, what did your sister do?" "Mom, I do not know anything about Renata's finances." "Well, you have to know something. You are an accountant." "I am not Renata's accountant." "What are they saying she did?" "Fraud," she sobbed. "They keep saying fraud and money laundering, and Cassie, I do not understand what any of it means. I just need you to come home." "I cannot come home right now." "What do you mean you cannot come? Your sister is being questioned by federal agents." "Mom, listen to me. You need a criminal defense attorney. Not the family lawyer. A criminal attorney." "Why would she need a criminal attorney? She is not a criminal." "Then she needs someone qualified to prove that. How can you be so cold?" She hung up. I searched for news from Crestwood Falls online and found a short article that had been posted 40 minutes earlier. Federal agents executed a search warrant Tuesday morning at a Crestwood Falls address in connection with an ongoing investigation into alleged investment fraud and money laundering. The subject allegedly transferred more than $580,000 into accounts connected to an offshore investment scheme later identified by federal authorities as a fraudulent operation. The article did not name Renata. But I knew. I called Sandra Kellerman immediately. She had already heard. Federal investigators had contacted her office the previous week to verify the trust fund distribution records. She had confirmed to them that my $300,000 portion had never been received by me. She had also provided them with documentation of the original trust terms and the timeline of distribution. "You are not a subject of this investigation," she said. "You are a witness and a victim. They are aware of your situation. They have cleared you completely." That evening Renata called me herself. Her voice was hollow, raw, like someone who had been crying for hours and had nothing left. "Cassie, I need you to understand something. I did not know it was fraud." She said the name was Marcus Elroy. He had approached her through a financial networking event 6 months after she received the trust fund. He had presented himself as a private investment manager with a track record of high returns and a portfolio of successful clients. He had an office and a website and references that all checked out on the surface. He told her he could grow her investment significantly within 18 months. She had transferred $580,000 into his accounts over 4 separate transactions. "Did you do any verification?" I asked. "I thought I did," she said. "I checked his website. I looked up his credentials. I called one of the references he gave me and they confirmed everything." "Did you check with the SEC? Did you speak with an independent financial advisor?" Silence. "Renata, he seems so legitimate. People who run fraud operations always do. That is the entire business model. Whether she knew does not change what happened. Whether she was a victim or a participant was something only investigators could determine. What I knew was that she had taken money that was partially mine by legal right, had moved it through unvetted channels, and it was now sitting in frozen accounts overseas where neither of us could reach it." My father called the next morning. "Cassie, we need you to come home. We need you to help explain things to the authorities. You understand these financial matters better than we do." I said, "Dad, I am not involved in this investigation in any capacity and I cannot get involved. You could tell them about Renata's character. You could explain that she is not a criminal. Character testimony does not factor into financial fraud investigations, Dad. They look at transactions and documents. Then help us look at the documents. I am not a criminal defense investigator. Dad, I need to say something to you and I need you to hear it. 2 years ago I came home to help with your taxes. I found $90,000 in undocumented withdrawals and I tried to tell you it was a serious problem. Do you remember what happened? He was quiet. Mom told me I was paranoid. She told me I was making things complicated. You both shut me down and sent me home. That was different. It was not different. The pattern was the same. The pattern was that when I identified a problem in this family I was dismissed. And now the problem has become something that federal agents are investigating and I am the person you are calling for help. After you left me with nothing in that lawyer's office 6 months ago. He said that decision was made based on what was best for the business. You gave Renata money that was legally mine and she lost it in a fraud scheme. Cassie, I am sorry this is happening to your family, Dad. I really am, but I cannot help you. He said you have become very hard. I said no, I have become honest. He hung up. That evening I sat at my desk and I wrote an email. I wrote it slowly and carefully the way I write anything that matters. I addressed it to my mother and father and Renata. I told them clearly that I was not involved in the investigation and had not initiated any legal action against them. I told them I had simply answered truthfully when Sandra Kellerman contacted me about the trust fund's distribution history. I told them I was genuinely sorry that this was happening. I told them I could not and would not involve myself in the criminal defense process. I told them that 2 years ago I had tried to bring a financial concern to their attention and had been refused. I told them that I understood why they had not listened then but that I hoped they could understand now why I was protecting myself in the present. I told them I wished them all the best outcome possible. And I told them I would not be responding to further requests for involvement. I read it 3 times. I hit send. My mother replied in 4 minutes. She said, I hope you are proud of yourself. My father did not reply at all. Renata replied 6 hours later. She said she would never forgive me for abandoning her when she needed me most. I closed my laptop and did not respond to any of them. Let me pause here for a moment. If you are still with me right now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a position where someone who had hurt you came back asking for help and you had to decide between your integrity and their comfort? Have you ever had to hold a boundary with someone you loved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This community is here for exactly those conversations. And if this story is speaking to something you have experienced, please give it a like and subscribe to Whispers of Wisdom. We are almost at the part where things start to resolve. 8 weeks later, the news reached local outlets. A Crestwood Falls woman had been formally charged with participation in an investment fraud scheme. The article named Renata Whitmore. It outlined the charges, including 1 count of wire fraud stemming from her involvement in the transfer of funds into accounts connected to an international financial crime operation. Her attorney had negotiated a plea arrangement based on her cooperation with federal investigators. Under the terms of the agreement, she would avoid prison. She would pay a fine of $180,000. She would complete 600 hours of community service. She would be barred from managing investment accounts for 7 years. Whitmore home renovations and the Birchwood Drive property had been listed for sale to cover legal costs and restitution. I read the article twice. I felt nothing that resembled celebration. I felt the same quiet sadness I had felt in that conference room 6 months ago. A version of grief that does not have a clear shape because it is not about one specific thing. It is about all the years, all the Sundays, all the graduations and holidays and moments when I had been on the outside looking in at my own family. The business my father had spent 30 years building was gone. The house I had grown up in was gone. The trust fund my grandmother had carefully set aside for the security of her granddaughters was mostly gone. And whatever had existed between my family and me was broken in a way I was not sure could ever be fully repaired. I did not post about it. I did not tell anyone except my closest friend in Columbus who already knew most of the story. I just sat with it. Sandra Kellerman called me the following week. The courts had processed the trust fund recovery records. My designated portion of $300,000 had remained in a separate protected account and had not been touched by Renata or anyone else. Because those funds had never been legally released to me in the first place, they had been isolated during the investigation and were now available for distribution. Miss Whitmore, she said, you will receive your $300,000 within 30 days. She also told me I had a legal right to pursue additional civil damages against my parents and Renata for the 5-year delay in distributing my inheritance plus interest and costs. She said given the circumstances I would likely prevail. I sat quietly on the phone for a moment. I do not want to do that, I said. Miss Whitmore, you are entitled. I know, but I am not going to spend the next 2 or 3 years in additional litigation against people who have already lost nearly everything. I just want what my grandmother meant for me to have. That is all I wanted from the beginning. She was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. I will process the paperwork. The money arrived in my account on a Thursday morning in late autumn. $300,000. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and looked at the number on my phone screen for a long time. I waited for joy or relief or something large. Instead, I felt something quieter. Something closer to resolution than to victory. Like a door closing gently on a room I had spent too many years standing outside of. In the 2 weeks that followed, I made a series of decisions that felt more like myself than anything I had done in a long time. The first thing I did was pay off the remaining balance on my student loans. $42,000 gone in a single transaction. I had been paying on them since I was 22 years old. I was 36. The weight of that number leaving my account felt like putting down something I had carried so long I had stopped noticing how heavy it was. The second thing I did was make a down payment on a small condo in the Clintonville neighborhood of Columbus. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, a window in the kitchen that gets morning light. It was mine. No one's name on the deed but mine. No one's permission required. The third thing I did was contact Ohio State University. I set up a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name. The Dorothy May Whitmore Fund for First-Generation Students. $25,000 initial endowment providing $2,500 annually to 10 students each year who were financing their education without family support. Students who were doing what I had done. Students who needed someone to believe that their ambition was worth investing in. I did not announce it. I did not post about it. I just did it because it felt like the truest way to honor what my grandmother had intended her money to accomplish. The remaining funds I put into savings and retirement accounts. No extravagant purchases. No performance of success for anyone else to see. Just security. Just breathing room. Just the kind of quiet stability I had been building toward my entire adult life and could now reach a little more easily. The night after the money arrived, I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote a letter. I addressed it to my grandmother Dorothy. I told her I was sorry it had taken so long. I told her I had used her gift carefully. I told her about the scholarship and about the condo and about the loans being gone. I told her that the story she had not lived to see had resolved in a way that felt true to who she had always been. Quiet, dignified, just. I told her I missed her. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer beside the folder with her will and her attorney's emails. I did not send it anywhere. It was just for me. In the months that followed, a few things happened that I want to share with you because they matter to the shape of this story. My cousin Jamie reached out to me privately on a Tuesday evening. She said she had followed the whole situation from a distance and she was sorry for how I had been treated and she was glad I had gotten what our grandmother had meant for me to have. She said she had always seen the disparity in how my family treated Renata and me and she had never said anything and she was sorry for that too. I told her it was okay. And I meant it, because sometimes the people who witness things feel just as powerless as the people those things are happening to. A woman named Monica from my home church sent me a card. Inside she had written something I carried with me for weeks afterward. She wrote that she had watched me grow up in that congregation and she had always known there was something in me that was built to outlast what my family put me through. She said she hoped I knew that the people who love us most are not always the people we were born to. My mother sent me one message. It arrived about 6 weeks after the funds had cleared. It said, "I see you got what you wanted." There was nothing else. No reflection. No acknowledgement. Just a sentence designed to make me feel like I had taken something rather than received what was always mine. I did not respond. I am pausing here again because I want to ask you something genuine. Do you think I should have helped my family navigate the investigation? Do you think family loyalty requires showing up even for people who have already made clear they do not see you as an equal? I want to know what you think. The comments below are a real conversation and I read them all. Please keep going because what I want to tell you next is what I have learned from all of it. And I think it might be the most important part. About 8 months after I moved into my condo, I was sitting by my kitchen window on a Saturday morning with coffee and a book and I caught myself thinking about the day in Gerald Pierce's conference room. The day I sat at the end of a table with nothing in front of me while the people I had come from distributed everything they had to my sister and called me difficult for having the audacity to exist outside their expectations. And I realized something I want to tell you clearly. That moment was not the worst thing that ever happened to me. That moment was the beginning of the end of something that had been slowly taking from me my whole life. The hope that if I was patient enough and available enough and good enough at my job and called every Sunday and showed up for every holiday and never made too much noise, my family would eventually see me clearly and love me fully and make space for me in the circle of what mattered. The day they did not give me that, I stopped waiting for it. And stopping waiting for something you were never going to receive is not a loss. It is a liberation. Had I wanted things to be different? Yes. Every day. Did I wish my parents had loved Renata and me with the same generosity and visibility? More than I can say. But wishing does not change what people are and what they choose. My parents had been choosing Renata over me since I was old enough to notice. The lawyers' meeting was not a new choice. It was the last one in a long sequence I had been watching my whole life. And by the time it happened, I was almost grateful for its clarity. At least now I did not have to wonder. Some people will tell you that family is everything. That you owe loyalty to the people who raised you regardless of how they treated you. That walking away makes you cold or selfish or the difficult one. I have thought about this carefully and I want to tell you what I believe. Family is not an obligation to absorb mistreatment indefinitely. Family is a relationship, and like every relationship, it is held together by the quality of how people treat each other. When one person consistently treats another as less than, the relationship itself is already broken. The ceremony of keeping it going does not fix that. I did not report my sister to anyone. I did not go looking for evidence of wrongdoing. I did not scheme or plan or maneuver. I simply answered honestly when asked and protected myself legally when I needed to, and stepped back from people who had made clear they did not value me. The consequences that came to my family came from their own choices. The withdrawals Renata could not explain. The trust fund money she handed to a stranger. The favoritism my parents had practiced for decades finally running out of road. None of that was mine. It was all theirs. And here is what I need you to hear if you are listening to this story and recognizing something in it. You do not need to be the architect of justice. You do not need to plan the revenge or orchestrate the downfall or find the perfect moment to show them what they did. You just need to stop covering for it. Stop absorbing it. Stop making yourself smaller so they can feel more comfortable. Stop explaining yourself to people who have already decided who you are. The truth has its own gravity. It will find its own level without your help. Boundaries are not walls. Boundaries are the door of your life, and you decide who gets to walk through it. You decide what behavior is acceptable inside that door and what behavior earns someone the seat outside it. When you have spent years letting people walk through who treat you as less than you deserve, it can feel selfish to start closing the door. It is not selfish. It is the most honest thing you will ever do for yourself and for them. I chose peace. Not because I had no anger. I had plenty. Not because I did not grieve. I grieved for years and in ways I am still sometimes surprised by. But because I understood at some point that feeding the anger and feeding the grief and feeding the hope that my family would one day choose me was consuming a life I needed to be living. And I had already spent 36 years in the waiting room of my own existence. I was done waiting. If you are in a situation right now where someone in your family or your circle of people is treating you as less than you deserve, I want to say something directly to you. You are not imagining it. You are not being too sensitive. You are not the difficult one for noticing how you are being treated and for wanting it to be different. Your feelings about it are legitimate, and your desire to be seen clearly and loved fully is not asking too much. It is asking for the minimum of what love actually means. And if you have tried everything and the answer is still the same, please know that walking away is not giving up. Walking away from a relationship that diminishes you is sometimes the bravest and most self-respecting thing you can do. It is the beginning of something better even when it does not feel that way yet. I am telling you my story because I want you to see what the other side of that door looks like. On this side there is a condo with morning light in the kitchen. There are student loans that are gone. There is a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name. There is peace. There are friends who see me clearly and love me without conditions and show up without waiting to be asked. There is work I am good at and proud of. There is a Saturday morning with coffee and a book and no dread. No Sunday phone calls that leave me feeling invisible. No more trying to earn what should have been freely given. On this side of the door I am not waiting for anyone's permission to be okay. I already am. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About 3 weeks after the funds cleared, I found something in my email. Not from my mother or my father or Renata. From an address I did not recognize that turned out to be my grandmother's neighbor in Mayfield Heights. A woman named Helen, who had been my grandmother's closest friend for 20 years and who had sat beside her every Tuesday afternoon for card games and had held her hand at the end. Helen wrote to say she had heard through the family grapevine about what had happened. She said my grandmother had talked about me often. She said my grandmother had told her she was proud of me for leaving and building something real. She said my grandmother had told her she was worried that I would not receive what she had left for me and had hoped she was wrong about that. And she said that wherever my grandmother was she hoped she knew it had finally been made right. I sat with that email for a long time. Then I wrote back and thanked her. And then I cried the way you cry when something that has been tight in your chest for a very long time finally lets go. My grandmother had seen me. She had always seen me. And she had done the only thing within her power to tell me so. That was enough. That was more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story today. If anything in it touched something in you, please leave a comment below. Tell me your own experience with family and fairness and the cost of having boundaries. Tell me where you are in the world and what time it is there. This community is built on the belief that you are not alone in what you have carried, and I want to hear from you. If you feel like this story is worth sharing with someone who needs it, please give it a like and pass it along. Subscribe to Whispers of Wisdom if you are not already here. There are more stories coming every week. Stories about real people navigating real things. About dignity and grief and the long quiet work of choosing yourself. I will see you in the next one. And until then, please remember this. You deserve to be treated with respect. Not because you have earned it through perfect behavior or endless patience or years of showing up for people who could not be bothered to show up for you. But because you are a person, and that is enough. You have always been enough. And anyone who has not been able to see that has always been the one with the problem. Not you. Never you.